Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillahi wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. My dear students, fellows and brothers, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. It's a great pleasure to record this lecture once again, and I am highly honored to present the new part of corporate finance lecture that we have discussed. Before we begin with the new lecture, or we continue the topic that we have studied previously, let's have a very quick glance of what we have studied. We have discussed in the previous lectures about the goals of a corporation, the profit maximization, and the wealth maximization. This part was actually the previous lecture. We said that profit maximization, a corporation focuses on earning short-term income or revenue. They want to generate the income very quick. They avoid discretionary expenses, or we can also call it for example, optional expenses, which are consumed on advertising, maintenance, and other parts. And it has less risk involved. And the pricing, usually the pricing strategies, we increase price. For pricing, we have strategies developed by various corporations. So more cost, more pricing. The prices are high in order to have quicker returns, and the capacity planning is as compared to the wealth maximization. There is no more focusing on the capacity planning. While in the wealth maximization, we focus on the overall value of the business to be increased in order to have a long run profits. And we talked about goals of financial management. We talked about importance of corporate finance. We also discussed corporate governance. We said these are the principles and policies, along with the procedures, which are clearly defined responsibilities for the stakeholders to overcome the conflicts which are taking within the organization. These conflicts are usually inherent in the organization. We said that corporate governance affects the operational risk, the risk that is involved in day-to-day operations of the organization. That is very critical for an organization. We also discussed the objectives and guiding principles in the previous lectures. We talked about the eliminating or mitigating the conflicts of interests. We talked about that assets in the company should be used efficiently and productively, which works as the best interest of the investors and the stakeholders. We talked about the core attributes and the benefits of corporate finance in an corporate governance in an organization or a corporate. We said that having corporate governance actually identifies the manager and the board of directors responsibilities. We also talked about it actually measures the accountability. It provides fair and equitable treatment to all employees, or even to the stakeholders or shareholders. Transparency is also one of the things which is part of the core attributes of the effective corporate governance. And also everyone is aligned with the rights of the shareholders and the stakeholders. Everybody knows about it. Or in other terms, everybody has an idea about the rights of the shareholders and other stakeholders. Alongside with this, we talked about some of the forms of the business in details. We talked about sole proprietorship, partnership, and also the corporation. We said that a sole proprietorship is owned by one person, and the risk is borne by this one person. So the creditors actually have the highest risk with respect to corporate governance, And the partnership, more than one person is involved, and the risk is distributed between the owners, very limited owners it have, and also the risk with respect to the governance is also available in a high level. On the other hand, in corporation, we said that it is a separate legal entity where the risk is usually borne by the corporation itself, not by the shareholders in the business. So advantages, we talked about that a corporation can have its own capital raised. It can have actually the owners itself do not need to be in the business themselves. Other people, experts, can run the business, and even the interests or the ownership is transferred to other person. And this is not possible in partnership, and usually mostly in the sole proprietorship. We talked about disadvantages. There are some of the differences between the corporation, partnership, and sole proprietorship. And in sole proprietorship, the owner is the ownership belongs to one guy. In partnership, multiple guys, and in corporation, there could be unlimited owners, hundreds and thousands. Think about those famous companies that you know of them, like Apple, Microsoft, and Samsung and other companies where there are a lot of people having ownership. It belongs to maybe one person, but a lot of people have shares in it. So similar to the legal requirements, the legal requirements for corporations are harder and much more than partnership and sole proprietorship. And here, the legal distinction between owner and business, in sole proprietorship, the businessman, the owner in the business, both are, and it means both are same, right? And same for the partnership. While in corporation, the owner is somebody else in the business, and in the corporation is somebody else. The government knows the corporation. For them, the corporation has a value because it's a separate legal entity which is registered with the government, right? And in regards to the liabilities is limited here. Also, the corporation can raise a very a huge amount of capital itself, while the sole proprietorship and partnerships have very limited ability to raise capital respectively, and transfer these cannot be transferred to other person, the ownership, while the corporation it's possible. یک نفر میتونه که شیر دیگه نفر بخره. And same for the expertise or expertise in sole proprietorship. The expertise and professionalism of the sole proprietor is necessary, while in partnership it's also necessary, but in corporation, it's not important because the owners would not be the managers and board of directors. Maybe they hire some other expert people who manage the business itself. So you see, that's why it says it's a separate legal entity, because the owner themselves do not need to engage in corporations, while the full engagement would be for people as managers or BOD, board of directors, or etc. So the board of directors, shareholders, and managers, there could be conflicts between these three people. These two, especially the shareholders and the managers, because shareholders are people who are owning this business, while the managers are people who are running the business. So these are two different entities, but somebody who works as an agent between these two are actually the board of directors. Board of directors are people who are actually making decisions for the organizations, who are passing the decisions, developing regulations. These are controlling the overall business. These are working as each agent between the shareholders, managers, and let's say the people as well. So managers and shareholders both are actually both have to listen to the board of directors. Maybe we will discuss the chart hypothetical organization chart later on, we will also see the responsibility of each of them. But in general term, board of director work as an agent and have the higher authority in the business as compared to these two parties, because even the CEO, the chief executive officer, works under board of directors. They usually have meetings like in 3 months or 6 months and 1 year. They pass decisions, they pass policies, they talk about specific areas where the organization should function, and that's usually their role. While talking about the shareholder management conflict, as we discussed before, managers are human. They may create, there would be problems created, conflicts created. So that is why if there is an effective corporate governance, these problems could be solved. And we already discussed this. Director shareholder conflicts, um, actually, we said that BOD or board of directors works as an intermediary between shareholders and management, and they actually represent shareholders' interests. به خاطری که بورد آف دایرکتور کار میکنن دیگه، هدفشان همی است که با فایده شیرهولدرام کار بکنن و با یک طریقه در مابین جای قسم کار کنن تا شیرهولدرها و منیجرها اردو به شکل درست استفاده شوه و تا کارپوریشن به یک جایگاهی که و تعیین کردن به او برسن. دیگه یا منیجرها را مانیتور میکنن، استراتژی را جور میکنن و دیگه چیزایی که ما قبلا بحث کردیم و را تنظیم و مراقبت میکنن. So there are responsibilities on the shoulder of the board of directors, as we discussed, and we have studied this in details. And these are some of the characteristics, attributes that board of directors should have. For example, they should be independent. They should be qualified. Qualification means based on the necessity and requirement of the corporation. Some corporations may have different qualifications required, and others would need other requirements. So that should be dependent upon the nature of the corporation. So elections should be there between board of directors. It depends. Some boards have elections within 2 years, 1 year, and even sometimes to 5 and 10 years. مطابق انتخابات بورد آف دایرکتور چی میشن، انتخاب میشن، باز خودشان اسسمنت هم دارن، چک میکنن. That's how it should work. And the policies that are actually developed by board of directors should be kept secret. There should be policies which should be disclosed, and in other parts that are discussed here, there should be transparency and etc. Some of the guiding principles that we have studied: there should be an effective board in each and every corporation that should be strong, and their duties and responsibilities should be clarified, well defined. There should be a transparent process for hiring board of directors, that we said, through election, for example. They have to be assessed, they have to fulfill their responsibilities, and there should be a proper board to elect their remuneration, or for example the salary package. عموما board of director که با مجالس میان باز جایا فکس سالری میگیرن، باز جایا با مو اساسی که جلسه میگیرن با مو اساس جلسه خودشان پول میگیرن یا با اساس مزد میگیرن. And there should be an audit committee which could identify the role of board of directors or to write them, and in other issues that are part of that could be part of it. Also, board of directors should see whether the internal audit have taken place, and in etc etc etc. So that was all about the majority of part was related to our previous lecture. In today's lecture, we are discussing the Organization for Economic Cooperation, OECD principles. OECD actually develops principles for have developed principles for corporate governance. For example, They talk about the rights of shareholders. Shareholders should have certain rights. We discussed them. They should be treated properly. The role of stakeholders in a corporate governance should be clearly identified. Disclosures and transparency, whatever needs to be disclosed should be disclosed. The transparent process should be taking place in an organization, not only corporation but also for board of directors, and the responsibilities of board should be clearly identified. So this is the part that you could check yourselves. Please go to internet and check OECD's, or Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, principles for corporate governance. Please type that and check. You can read that in details. We have already talked about the guidelines and principles in the previous slides, so there is no need to describe them in great detail. So please look at the website. If you have problems, I will assist you in that in order to solve that particular problems that you have. So you have to Google these principles, OCED's principles for corporate governance. Moving ahead, we need to talk about ESG. ESG means the environmental, social, and governance factors. ECG risk exposure, actually, we talked about. It is actually the risk which is associated with the management or the proper organization of the environment, social, and governance issues involving mitigating risks and managing these risks when they arise. So, in order to sustain an organization, in order to evaluate an organization, there has to be a proper management of the environment, social, and governance factor. Um, Even if we talk about an organization which should have proper board, as we discussed, an organization should have, for example, effective governance structure, but an organization structure, or for example bylaws, we should also make sure that the organization itself have proper environmental issues to be followed. What does this mean? You know, corporations usually have bigger things to do. Some corporations, they manufacture things, they produce things. اگر ما شما مثلا در مورد یک کمپانی چی گپ بزنیم که مثلا بگوییم که وا کیمیکلز تولید میکنن یا صابون تولید میکنن یا اسلحه تولید میکنه. عموما کمپانی هایی که تولیدات دارن و تولیداتشان وقتی که به مصرف میرسه از او یک مواد اضافی و چیزای اضافی به فضا میره یا او میکس میشه. مثلا اگه ما درباره کمپانی شامپو گپ بزنیم دیگه، او وقتی که شامپو تولید میکنه او چیزای اضافیش در جوی و در گپا میره، باز که او که در او میکس میشه دیگه، او یک چیز از به نام واتر پلوشن او را کرییت میکنه، او را چی میکنه دیگه. اگه واتر پلوشن باشه مثلا او وقتی که در سمندر میره و در جویا میره و اوج از سمندر با ماهیا و با این گپا تاوان داره. و اگه در خانه بیاین شما فکر کنین خصوصا در مورد آب کابل، بیشتر از 75% آب کابل بدبختانه باید بگیم که او پاک نیست. مثلا هوا را ببینین که هوای کابل در جمله کشورهای یا شهرهای بزرگ میایه که هوایش کثافات زیاد است و پاک نیست. اما قسم اوش گپ زدیم دیگه. او دلایل زیاد داره. مثلا موتورها هست که کمپانی که موتور تولید میکنن باید کوشش کنن که موتورها رو به شکلی تولید بکنن که او زیاد پلوشن کرییت نکنه. یا مثلا ما سنگ زغال استفاده میکنیم خصوصا در زمستانه، حال شما میبینین که بسیار کثافات و آلودگی و گپا زیاد کرده. اما قسم زیاد مسائل است و کمپانی که مثلا استخراجی هستن، مثلا نفت و تیل تولید میکنن، اگه او چیزای اضافیش در جوی و در سمندر و در آب و در کانالا بره و با ماهیا و با چیزایی که داخل آب است به او تاوان داره، حتی با فصلهای ما تاوان داره. این قسم زیاد چیزا هست که باعث امو environmental issues یک ارگانیزیشن میشه، یعنی یک مشکل جور میکنه. به این خاطر من دولت ها که هست بالای هر ارگانیزیشن اصول وضع میکنه، یعنی به هدف ازی که 1% پول خود باید در corporate social responsibility مصرف کنن. CSR برش میگن. مثلا در هند و در دیگه جا از بودجه خود باید یا در کارهای خیریه و در پارک جور کردن و به مردم آب جور کردن و دیگه چیزا مصرف میکنن. شما وقتی که در مورد بنیاد باید فکر میکنن you think about Bunyad Foundation, you will think about they are helping in such issues, and there are very little organizations in Afghanistan which are doing this in order to stop the environmental challenges that they have. In social part of risk that we have, workplace issues within the organization, the workplace environment. For example, you talk about the quality of things that affects the quality of the work in the organization, inside the organization. How is the atmosphere? Is it fair or not? مثلا شما اگر مولتی نشنل کمپانی ها فکر کنین، مثلا مایکروسافت و گوگل یا اوجا داخل به کارمندا هر سهولت جور کردن. یک نفر دق میاره یک جای است که اوجا مثلا او بره تیبل تنیس کنه، کریکت کنه، فوتبال کنه. مثلا یک کارمند خسته میشه به او رخصت میده. ما در کشور خود میبینیم که کارمندا بسیار زیر فشار میباشن و نمیتونن که کار خود به شکل درست پیش ببرن. So these are the issues that can be raised in an organization. به این خاطر باید در ورک پلیس که ما کار میکنیم باید او سموت باشه، سهولت باشه و به خاطر از اینکه پرشر و چیزا کم باشه بر ما فرصت باشه که ما رخصتی داشته باشیم و یک ماحول آزاد باشه که مردم بره اوجا کم ذره استراحت کنه و چیزا کلگی باشه. The product quality and safety product ما باید سیف باشه و مشکلاتی نداشته باشه که با کارمندا خصوصا با مشتریا it's like ineffective and dangerous. There are products, for example, shampoos, soup, and etc., which they use. It should be safer. You should let them the safety tips. There was a cell phone. I think it was Samsung Galaxy Note 7, something like it. I forgot. It was a very good mobile. When people started using it, in some places their battery exploded. Samsung said it is okay. It was 2 or 3 cases. Then people were abandoned to go to airports in airplanes with Samsung Note 7. And later on, Samsung announced that there is something wrong with the battery. So this has affected their revenue, their image and goodwill. If Samsung would have said it before, it would have been better than saying it later on. So that's why the important factor is that you let your customers, consumers, or stakeholders all about the safety tips of the product that they're using. Communication, community interaction, how you interact with the community, your employees, and etc. If you keep your employees happy, they will keep your customers and consumers and final end users happy. And governance, effective corporate governance. If we have corporate governance or organization structure or bylaws, it will actually reduce the risk of ESG. So the total understanding is you keep these risks decrease, you have a very good environments in social environment and governance for the organization. There are a few examples also mentioned here. For example, legislative and regulatory risk, that is the role of governments, that they take legislation in the big actually policies and rules. Legal risk, lawsuits, for example, you come across with problems with the government and law issues, etc. So that is also part of the legal risk or the complaints that comes on your corporation. So you should not allow people to have complaints over you. Reputational risk involve the risk of the good name of the company. If you do something bad or if you do not keep the quality of the product well, it will affect your good name, image or goodwill. در پاکستان یک چی بود به نام لیز، شما هم شاید یگان وقت رو بخورین. لیز چپس بود، باز یک اصطلاح به نام دی مارکتینگ. یگان کمپانی کوشش کردن که تا این کمپانی را بدنام کنه، دیگه اعلان کردن که این کمپانی از چی استفاده میکنه، وقتی که لیزه پخته میکنه در روغن خوب پخته میکنه. بازی گودویلی کمپانی بسیار خراب شد، ریوینیوشان پایین آمد. باز یک عالم بود به نام جنید جمشید، حال وفات شده. او باز آمد جدید و به کلگی مردم گفت که نه ما چک کردیم روغن خنزیر پخته نمیشه یا خوب باز پس مسئله جور شد. هدفی بود که یک کارپوریشن باید کوشش کنه که یک کار انجام نده که به reputation یک کمپانی اثر داشته باشه. Operation risk, it is operation that is taking place in the day-to-day activities, routine activities. The product failures, the IT failures, the safety issues, all are part of the operational or operating risk within the organization. یک مثلا یک مشکل پیدا میشه، سیستم جام میشه، سیستم عمومی خراب میشه، دومین خراب میشه، لوکال سیستم خراب میشه، یک جای خدا نخواسته آتش میگیره. این مشکلاتی است که ESG risk زیاد میکنه. Financial risk is discussing the danger that can result to the capital loss of interested parties for governments, for example. The monetary policy اثر میکنه، یعنی در خود بجت و در خود فایننس سیستم یک ارگانیزیشن اثر میکنه. دیگه او کوشش شوه که فاینانشل ریسک هم زیاد نباشه. به این خاطر ما میگیم که اپریشنال ریسک شاید پارت آف فاینانشل ریسک هم باشه، به خاطری که اگر پروداکت فیلیر میشه و سیفتی ایشوز و آیتی ایشوز میشه، این هم لید میکنه به فاینانشل ریسک و تاوان به اصطلاح پول و به چیزای مربوط به مالیات و چیزای مالی باز چی میشه، مرتبط میشه. دیگه مسئله است. The other issue is the valuation implications of corporate governance. When we value the practical implication of corporate governance, so in the valuation we come across two major topics. And the first one is the benefits from a strong corporate governance, and the second one is the risks of weak corporate governance. So it means that while you are applying the corporate governance, you have to know both the benefits of having a strong corporate governance and the benefits of not having a strong corporate governance, which in turn means that if you do not have a strong corporate governance, you will ultimately have a weak corporate governance. So what are the disadvantages or cons of a weak corporate governance, and what are the pros or strong points or advantages of having a strong corporate governance? This is what we will be discussing in the coming slide. To be frank, having a weak corporate governance will lead to accounting risk. By accounting risk, we mean that, for example, whatever you are presenting in the income statement or financial statements or balance sheet, that would not be fair. It will be, for example, inappropriate information would be part of it. Or in other words, you have not stated whatever is part of the financial statements properly. شما در او اشتباهات دارین، دروغ گفتین یا یگان مسائل وجود داره. اگر ما یک weak corporate governance داشته. Asset risk. For example, the assets which are part of the organization are misappropriated by the directors or managers. That are misused, that are not properly used, or they are used in a way which is against the legal policies or against the policies developed by the government. Because when assets comes to an organization, all those assets are recorded with the government. If you do not properly treat the assets, it will lead to a problem in the organization. So what we need to do is we have to record, when we record all those assets which are part of the corporation, we cannot use them inappropriately. We cannot use it for our personal gains. We cannot use it for a bad purpose. Liability risk, as we said, that it is when the shareholders' equity value is not properly utilized, or in other words, the risk of liability, the creditors, and etc. Will actually affect the shareholders' value of the equity that is available. The strategic policy risk is that when the managers enter into transactions or other business risks that are self-serving and may not be in the best long-term interest of the shareholders. It means that the strategic policy is not properly designed, and it will be in a way that would not work in best interest of the shareholders. So that was all for our today's lecture. And for the coming lecture, inshallah, we will see you again. We will study the risks in a very quick snapshot, and then we will be discussing the benefits. We will be having a summary of this whole lecture, and we will talk about hypothetical organization chart, and we will try to find some time to discuss financial statements. Otherwise, we will take that in the next lectures, and then we will go to our practical questions later on, inshallah. So that was all for today. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.